Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series on American history. Today we'll be looking at the New England colonies, their formation, and some of their philosophies and history. My name is Paul. I am the social studies teacher here at Penn Foster High School. A couple of quick ways of contacting myself and the rest of the educational team. We can be found by phone, also by FAQs, chats, emails on our help and support page. For more academic help, you are able to use the high school webinar schedule that is available on your program courses page. From that page, you can go into the specific courses that you're looking at and be able to set up appointments, be able to attend live office hour help, and then also live webinars and recorded webinars like this one that you're attending today. You can also text the word learn to 390, it should be 39033 is our chat number that you can certainly, again, be able to contact the education department for any academic help. As we go through the webinar today, I certainly encourage you to type in questions in the chat feature here in this webinar, and I'll do my best to be able to answer them either right away during the webinar, or if it's a better question that can be handled towards the end, or I know is going to be covered later on, I may skip that question for the time being. But certainly, again, type in questions. I'm more than happy to answer them, again, either throughout the webinar or towards the end. So let's get started on just knowing what we're going to be learning today. As I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the New England colonies, of the English colonies. So we're going to be recognizing the history of religious tensions in England, as well as analyze the Pilgrims and Puritan beliefs and faith and on others. We'll examine the Pilgrims, how the Pilgrims survived in the New World, evaluate the growth of the New England colonies, and then contrast the limits of the lives of Puritans and the Pilgrims as well. So that will be what we cover. Are there any questions as we get started? No questions thus far. All right, so let's get right into sort of the more European history side of things when it comes to American history. We'll look first at the context of why many of our New England colonies were developed, and that mainly came out of the religious strife that came in England. If you think back to European history, maybe in middle school, maybe early high school, you'll have world history a little bit later on in your Penn Foster program. But there was the big tension came between the Catholic Church and the new Church of England, coming out of Henry VIII and wanting to have different wives, wanting to have additional children, and so came the Church of England as a new official religion of the English people. And there was immediate general acceptance by many in England, but not all. Many in the Catholic Church did believe, wanted to continue to follow the Pope, wanted to follow the Catholic traditions, and there ended up being a lot of bloodshed between the two religious groups, trying to fight for the superiority within England and throughout Europe as well. There was a lot of religious strife between Catholics and different Protestant religions. Queen Elizabeth I was able to cool tensions, both as a Catholic herself, but also as one who respected the Church of England, wanted to believe in the Church of England, but also the traditions of the Catholic Church. And with Queen Elizabeth's reign, there came to be sort of two not extremist groups, but certainly groups that were within the Church of England, but those who did not necessarily subscribe to all the parts of the Church of England, nor were they willing to accept the Catholic Church. The Puritans were one that wanted to purify the Church of England, believed it was becoming corrupt, as well as the Pilgrims, who are sort of the separatists, wanted to separate from the Church of England purely, to be able to have their own religion, be able to have their own part of Christianity, and have their own beliefs followed as that small group within the Church of England and within Christianity. After Queen Elizabeth's reign, there came the Stuart family, the Stuart royal family. They wanted to follow the Anglican or Church of England faith, but also admire Catholicism. So they, very much like Queen Elizabeth I, originally tried to go between the divide, trying to bridge the divide, I should say, but they were still very much against these two sort of outsiders religious sects. So they were believing that both Puritans and Pilgrims, who had their founders as John Calvin, believed he was a heretic, believed that he was not of Christian belief, was not someone who was trying to profess the Christian faith, but was really more on the other side of things. So believed more against Christianity, against God. So the Stuart family, the new sort of reign of the Church of England, was particularly against and particularly did not want Puritans or Pilgrims within England. So both groups felt it was time to leave England, saw the strife, saw the anger towards them by not only the Stuart family, but also both the Catholic Church and the Church of England. So they felt that it was time, really time for them to go. And their first stop on their travels was going first to the Netherlands. They didn't immediately go to the American colonies. They decided to first go much closer to the Dutch Netherlands. And they were immediately happy with the fact that they were being accepted, that they were able to practice their religion openly. They were able to basically follow their faith much more openly in the Netherlands, not having to hide, not having to be attacked by both the Catholics and the Church of England. However, they only wanted themselves to be accepted. They didn't want other religious groups to be accepted within the Netherlands, which has ended up being what happened. That other groups had basically the same level of tolerance from the Dutch. And the Puritans, both the Puritans and mainly the Pilgrims at the time, were kind of disgusted by that. So they sort of saw the next step as going to the New World, that they viewed it as basically unspoiled, that they were going to go to a place that didn't have other levels of Christianity, did not have other religious beliefs. So they were able to kind of set the standard of what religion meant in the New World. So they were going to go. They were going to. They financed the Mayflower voyage in 1620. And you can only imagine if anyone's been out on sea, either on ocean, but also even just in large lakes, in the Great Lakes, in some of the larger lakes around the country, or even larger rivers, you know that when the seas are good, when the weather is good, it's a great experience. But when it's bad, when it's the storm, when the ocean is bad, when the weather is bad, it can be completely two different experiences. And that was something that the Pilgrims did be able to just kind of experience, have basically a family experience just on the boat. And they were already very closely tied, so they were used to being together. But in bad conditions, it was underneath the boat, much limited food supply, much limited ability to do a whole lot as they were inside the boat. So very, very different experience as they traveled across the Atlantic Ocean. They were originally supposed to arrive in Jamestown, the Virginia colony, and follow their charter. So they were never given a specific charter by England or even by the Netherlands. But because of the rough seas as they were coming to port, as they were coming closer and closer to America, they end up having to kind of veer off course, not able to stay in Virginia, but end up going farther north and ending up in Plymouth Rock, where today's Massachusetts is. The Pilgrims immediately realized that and decided that they needed to establish their own charter. So they formed what's called the Mayflower Compact, which established sort of essentially the first self-rule within the American colonies. Anyone who talks about why America was different from so many other revolutions, so many other attempts at democracy and as attempts at a republic, we immediately can start looking back at our colonial past. That between the Mayflower Compact and even the Virginia colonies, where the first representative democracy or the first representative legislature was approved with the Virginia legislature, we immediately see sort of the experience of wanting to have self-rule. That there's never a point of our colonial past that we say, well, you know what, we'd really rather just be ruled by the king. We'd really just be ruled by someone who tells us what to do. That is not the American experience, and that is one of the reasons why the American Revolution occurs the way it does. And as we go through more of the American history series, as you read more American history, even thinking back to your civics course, if you took that, you sort of have that sense that America had a different experience in our revolution and in our ability to be able to form the Republican government that we have. And that brings us to our first poll question. Why did the Pilgrims decide to leave the Dutch Netherlands? Take a minute to look over the answers, think about what we just talked about in these previous slides, and mark your answer. Give you guys about 50. All right, finishing up. Appreciate everyone's responses. So the answer, unfortunately, is one that no one responded to. That citizens were welcoming to all faiths. So if we look back at our slide here, the first stop, the Dutch Netherlands, that they accepted the Pilgrims, which of course they were happy about. But then the Pilgrims weren't happy about the fact that all the other faiths that had come to the Netherlands from various countries were also being accepted. So we see that one of the sort of the limits for the Pilgrims in terms of their own religious rights and what they view as rights, they wanted themselves to be accepted because they felt that they had the right Christian religion. However, they did not feel, because they felt they were right, they did not want anyone else to really feel welcomed. They didn't want other people to feel like they should worship their faith, worship they wanted to do. But because the Pilgrims felt that they were so right, that they were the only ones who were essentially worthy of practicing their Christian religion. Are there any questions on that section? Certainly let me know, and we'll be more than happy to talk through any questions you have. So if you remember back in section or the previous sections in lesson 1, another sort of common strain was the fact that there were a lot of problems for the new English colonists, that many of them were not prepared and were not ready to deal with American harsh winters, particularly the coastal cities, coastal colonies, rough cities, or rough weather, I should say. So the harsh winter really killed off almost over half the Pilgrims that landed on Plymouth Rock. The voyage itself had very few casualties. So the fact that over half of them died in that first winter was sort of a shock to the new colonists. They were able to get some relief from a Native American English translator and advisor, Squanto. He was able to assist them after that first winter, in uh, and he also kind of brokered a peace treaty that was with the Wapango Native American tribe, in which the Pilgrims provided military support, while the Wapangos were able to assist in farming, that the Pilgrims were then able to use for their survival in future years. As I mentioned, the Mayflower Compact established self-rule. So the first governor of the Plymouth Rock colony, Bradford, was elected governor. He was elected several times, and through his leadership, it was able to the colony was able to grow their food supply successfully. They were able to have continued peace with the Wapangos and other Native American tribes. And it comes to pass the sort of the first traditional holiday of the new America, of the American colonies, being the first Thanksgiving. That it was the time of traditional harvest festival for the Native Americans, and the Pilgrims were essentially able to celebrate their own survival. That after the first year, after the first winter, many of them probably felt that they were going to that this colony was not going to work. But because of the Native American partnership, because of their treaty, because of their support, the Pilgrims were able to survive through those first couple of years. The Thanksgiving that we know today was declared by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, as America is sort of in desperation during the Civil War. He sets in 1863 a national celebration of Thanksgiving. Next, we come upon the sort of one of the ways that we know more about the Plymouth Rock, and then eventually the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and the arrival of more Puritans in 1630, and John Winthrop, the leader of the new Puritan group, the future governor of Massachusetts Bay, really sets the standard of what he believes Massachusetts Bay will be. That with the combinations of both the Pilgrims and the Puritans, that they were going to be a model of Christian charity and a beacon to Europe, meaning that they are going to be able to show Europe what what essentially what they lost, what Europe and England particularly lost with the Pilgrims and Puritans leaving Europe. John Winthrop believed that he was going to be able to show them through this what he called the city upon a hill, the eyes of all people are upon us, that this new Massachusetts Bay Colony was going to be the envy of the world, that this new colony was going to show uh, the greatness of the Puritans and Pilgrim Christian beliefs. The cornerstone of the Pilgrim and Puritan belief system was the idea of predestination, believing that God knew exactly who was going to be saved as soon as that person was born, that it was predestined, basically a destiny before a person is born of whether or not they're going to be saved or not. That a group of sort of Christian elders or church elders called the elect would have conversions and essentially see God's grace. And these living saints would only do God's will and be an example of that will. That they are going to be, that because they were the elect, because they were these living saints. They knew exactly how to behave. They knew how to um, govern. They knew how to follow God's preaching. Thus, it was going to be that shining beacon, that shining city on the hill, because of the people who were saved, the people who were the elect. Um, the colony did still allow what they called dissenters, those who were not converted, those who were going to be essentially predestined to not be saved. But they certainly did not have the same rights and the same abilities as those who were the elect. Um, the colony also kind of took upon themselves to have what they called the punishments from the Old Testament, that based on God's will, people who were charged with crimes or convicted of crimes would have public whippings, have harm done upon them. Public shaming and public embarrassment were common punishments in Massachusetts Bay. Again, following sort of the punishment styles of the Old Testament, I should say. Sort of a continuation of what's going on in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The colony does continue to grow, but it's never actually established as an official charter. So the colony of the Massachusetts Bay is really just kind of an unofficial colony of the English. There is an elected legislature, sort of again the continuing that belief in self-government. The clergy themselves are never elected members are not able to be elected members of the state legislature, but they are considered as one would assume within a Puritan or Pilgrim society. They were very instrumental in making decisions. So the governor of the state's legislature were certainly looking to the clergy, looking to them to be able to make new decisions for the colony. And for the most part, early on, this experiment works. This experiment it works very well for Massachusetts Bay, and for John Winthrop as its governor. Generally, we see a much longer life expectancy among the citizens of Massachusetts Bay. We see more children born within the colony as well. It is, however, still very male dominated, and this is not really new to Massachusetts Bay, as we will see throughout American history, and especially through world history. Male domination and male supremacy is not new, and the Puritans, again, very much believed in that as part of their religious faith and following the Bible. And one of their sort of key laws in terms of being able to be a valued citizen within Massachusetts Bay was a mandatory church attendance, as part of, again, part of the government of Massachusetts Bay. So we really see sort of the in one part, the Massachusetts Bay tries to be just as democratic as other colonies within the new English colonies. But we also see a large amount of following of the Christian faith, and the following of what the Puritans had believed, what they read through the Bible, and we sort of see this kind of this belief in this kind of stringent belief within uh, um, Puritanism, sort of almost stop the growth of Massachusetts Bay. We see it in a couple of examples of dissent. And before I get into that, I do have a second poll question. How were the Puritans' beliefs used in colonial life? Again, take about 20 seconds, look over the answers, and pick the one you feel is the best. Finishing up the poll questions in about 5 seconds. Okay, thank you. All right, so the majority of you are correct that the clergy were able to advise on colonial laws. Punishments, you're close. Punishments were based on Old Testament teachings, and non-Christians were allowed within the colony. So remember the groups of dissenters. They were allowed in the colony, but certainly did not have as many of the rights because they were not necessarily going to be churchgoers. They were not necessarily going to be the living saints that the Puritans really looked for. But they were still allowed. They were still allowed within the colony. So as I mentioned, there's sort of a divide between the Republican or the sort of the political structure of Massachusetts Bay being wanting to have the legislature, having the elected governor, but also their following of the Christian teachings, the religious teachings, sort of sometimes got in the way of their continued growth and their continued expansion of rights. And we sort of see that in the coming decades of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where more people are coming to Massachusetts Bay and having some conflicts. So as I mentioned, the Puritans had this sort of major devotion of to God's principles, that none of them could be necessarily ignored. None of them were to be questioned. These are God's principles. These are the principles of what the Massachusetts Bay Colony is set out for. And when they start having those who question, it becomes a bit of an issue. So the first one was a woman named Anne Hutchins, who argued with many of the clergy within the Massachusetts Bay on the behavior of those who were the living saints or the elect, those who are presumed to be saved, versus the idea of predestination. So Anne's main belief was, well, if my behavior, if I'm predestined to be saved, my behavior thus doesn't really matter. So why should I really worry about my behavior if I know, or if I am told that I am predestined to be saved? The church clergy never really have a fantastic answer for this, and so Hutchinson is really able to gain prominence, able to gain a following because of her questioning and because of the questions that she asks that no one's really able to answer. So she begins still following the beliefs of the church, still attending church, still a citizen of Massachusetts Bay, but she is still meeting parishioners at her home, discussing the sermon, probably having their own little spin on things in terms of what was being told and what she or others believed that the Bible was actually telling. And at a certain point, she is actually banished from the colony. In 1637, she's basically told, you know what, you're no longer welcome in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And Hutchinson ends up going and following Roger Williams, who is a Puritan preacher. His main argument with Massachusetts Bay was that he saw a problem with the lack of separation of church and state. This is one of the fundamental beliefs that we have today within America. Again, this is certainly not the case in Massachusetts Bay and in Puritan times. There is it is lockstep between the church beliefs and the workings of the state. And Williams, even though he is a Puritan preacher, argues against this. He also argues that it's a sin for land to be taken from Native Americans. So much like every other colony, as the Puritans and the Pilgrims expanded, as they population grew, they moved west, and the people who were already living in the western parts of what we now consider to be Massachusetts and the other New England states were Native Americans. So as they kept on moving west, they're pushing and pushing the Native Americans farther and farther away from their homelands. And Williams, again, was arguing against that and he eventually founds a new colony of Rhode Island, separate from Massachusetts, and that is where Anne Hutchinson also goes before she ends up leaving there, going to the New York colony, and dying, unfortunately, just a few years later. The other new colony that is established out of sort of disdain or dissent from Massachusetts Bay is Connecticut. And another Puritan minister named Thomas Hooker resents, again, the idea of that there should be a division between church attendance and political power. And he establishes a fundamental order of Connecticut. It is the first written constitution of the New World. Hooker is also elected governor, and then he also establishes a two-house legislature, so the bicameral system that we have today between our Congress, our House of Representatives, and the U.S. Senate. Now, Hooker does not completely divide church and state. He still establishes blue laws, which are laws based on the Bible. And one of its main tenets was a wide use of the death penalty, again, for crimes that we would certainly not consider to be death penalty worthy. Again, using sort of the Old Testament beliefs, Hooker believed that this was still a part of God's will, part of Christianity, that those who were did not follow the Ten Commandments should be put to death. Still have the death penalty put in place. That leads us to our next poll question. What was a similar reason, or was it a similar reason for both Connecticut and Rhode Island to be established as new colonies, or that they were separated from Massachusetts Bay, I should say? What was a similar reason why they did decide to separate from Massachusetts Bay? Give you guys about another 5 seconds. Okay, thank you. So the answer being option B, the separation of church and state, was the correct answer. The belief in predestination was probably still a belief by both colonies, but that was also the same as Massachusetts Bay. So it wasn't really a reason for division between the colonies, but that separation of church and state was one that was definitely a difference between what Connecticut and Rhode Island wanted versus what Massachusetts Bay wanted. So our final section today is just looking at sort of another sort of dark spot on the Massachusetts Bay Colony in terms of its early history, was the Salem witch trials. And from those, we have the early accusations of witchcraft by young girls who acted possessed, and a slave within the town, and actually the slave of the town preacher was the first to be accused of being a witch, that she was close to the girls, that she was accused of establishing witchcraft and having seances out in the woods. And we see sort of 5 types of evidence throughout this process of witches being accused and tried. That a witch would not have would be asked to recite the Lord's Prayer. They would be looking for either moles or any blemishes on the skin were seen as possible portals to hell and to the devil. They were also looked at witness testimony, so thinking about the 5 girls who had accused the town preacher's slave, and other witnesses. Many of them accused themselves, um, and then they made deals or they tried to get out of the death penalty and said, "Oh well, I know this person is actually a witch." Um, if you've ever been accused as a ghost, this was a particularly weird one in which if you were a if you as a person were seen outside of yourself, so seen as a ghost, that was proof of being a witch. And then in some cases there was actual confessions, that women who either were told that they could be set free or have a lighter sentence or a lighter punishment would also confess to being a witch. The witchcraft itself, or the Salem witch trials, um, did end up taking a number of lives. Pilgrim women's lives was eventually ended when the governor's own wife was accused of being a witch. That, of course, uh, not shockingly, that brought an end to the trials as soon as she was accused. Historians have since been wondering, what actually happened in Salem. Assuming that it was not witchcraft, what could have happened? Many thought that because of the expansion, as I mentioned, westward, um, that some diseases, some unknown diseases, may have been caught by these girls or caught by other people that were then seen. If they were could have been seen as being possessed. If some of the people had seizures, if people were delirious, if people were looking very ill in a way that no one has ever seen before, it's very likely that there could have been some diseases there that no one had been aware of, and no one was able to know until afterwards, after the witch trials had already been done. And of course, more of a sociology or social analysis of the people, if thinking about life in Massachusetts Bay, where particularly a teenage girl probably had very little power, had very little influence in society, had little effect on society. No one really paid attention to them. The idea of, hey, I can get attention, hey, I will be listened to if I accuse someone of being a witch, that immediately becomes a bit of a concern as well. That if these girls were accusing people just to get attention, just because they were now getting attention from their parents or from the elders of the colony, that becomes a major issue as well. So that is something that historians are sort of looking at in terms of the Salem witch trial as to the reason why this happened. And that brings us to the end of the webinar. If I didn't mention it before, this you do want to make sure that you read through the course reading material for this lesson to make sure that you go through. I just kind of go over the main points within each section. So please make sure that you are going through all the material before taking the exams. Make sure you're doing the practice exercises as well. But at this point, if you do have any questions, I will stay online for another 10 minutes or so. But thank you all for participating in the poll. Thank you for participating in the webinar, and good luck in your program and good luck in your studies. Again, if you do have questions, you can type those in. Otherwise, you are